from politics and discuss matters minimum wage. And yesterday, during the Labor Day celebrations, President Uhuru Kenyatta directed that the minimum wage goes up to 18%. Now, so many questions arise. So many people do not understand what exactly minimum wage means. Is it enough? Is it sustainable in a shrinking economy? Will employers comply with the directive? In studio, we're joined by Maurice Odwor, an advocate and also economic analyst. Also Joshua Kipto, an investment manager at Cyton, an employment and sorry, I think I've got it wrong. Joshua Kipto is an advocate, an employment and labor relations expert. Maurice Odwor is an investment manager at Cyton and an economic analyst. I'll be engaging this gentleman in a short while. But now let's go back to politics and the issues of party nominations and the disputes arising there. We need to get an update from the Jubilee Party headquarters. Hassan Mugambi has been there. A very good morning to you, Hassan. More than 400 pending cases before the appeals board at Jubilee. Where are they now?
Well, thank you very much, Fred. Back at studio. Yes. More than 400, as you have said it, that are facing the appeals tribunal. Remember, the the nine-member board is supposed to be sitting down and dispensing with the more than 400 cases. Then they only have up until the 10th of this month because the Jubilee Party is supposed to be presenting its list of nominated members to the IEBC for the exercise of printing of ballot papers. But of interest here today, we are expecting two landmark rulings that will be made here today in Nairobi County. That is the Starehe constituency, where Commander Maina, the incumbent, is at loggerheads with Charles Kanyi Jaguar, or popularly known as Jaguar, the musician, who are having a tussle over the Jubilee ticket of Starehe. Every one of them saying that they emerged victorious in the just concluded party primaries, and while Minor Commander was talking about retallying of the votes, Jaguar on the other side was saying that he will not accept the retally of votes because the ballot papers have already been tampered with, according to him. And then again, we also have the Kamukunji, where incumbent Yusuf Hassan is at loggerheads with Simon Bugwa, who each of them say that they emerged victorious. Those are the two that we are expecting a ruling on today. One for Starehe is supposed to be ruled at around 5 p.m. and the one for Kamukunji is supposed to be coming in earlier, but then again, we don't know what time. We're expecting to also hear from the chair of the appeals tribunal, Faith Waigwa, who will be speaking to the media and just updating us on where they are in as far as the appeals are concerned. Remember, 508 appeals were presented here by the aspirants from across the country. We're talking about gubernatorial aspirants, we're talking about MCA, we're talking about MPs, all the levels of the seats that are being competed on were here, and they were just making their statement saying that they actually want justice in as far as the appeal hearing is concerned. They also yesterday we also managed to speak to some of the aspirants who presented themselves here, up to and including the Nakuru governor Kinuthia Mbugua, who is at loggerheads with Lee Kenyanjui, who was announced the winner of the party primaries in that particular county. But then again, he was making a lot of he was raising concern in as far as the speed at which the appeals tribunal is handling the cases. Remember, he was earlier on informed that within 48 hours of his presentation of the appeal, it will be over and done with. But then again, as at yesterday, more than 48 hours later, he had not approached the bench yet. So the kind of speed that the tribunal is also making headways in as far as hearing and dispensing with the appeals is concerned is actually a point of concern to the members of the Jubilee Party, some of them just threatening to go independent should they fail to be served with justice here. So that is the kind of situation that we have here right now. But then again, we will be digging for more information in as far as the appeals are concerned, and we will be just giving to you up to the minute information from the Jubilee Center. Fred.
Thank you, Hassan. Hassan Mugambi there live from the Jubilee Party headquarters here in Nairobi, where the party's appeals tribunal continues to hear and resolve disputes to do with the recently concluded party primaries. Of course, we'll be going back to Hassan if and when he has an update. Back to studio and away from political party primaries, we now want to discuss matters to do with minimum wage. And I had introduced my guests, Alia Maurice Odwor, economic analyst, and Joshua Kipto, employment and labor relations expert. Gentlemen, good morning. Now, was this the right time for the president to do this, or do you think it's just campaigns, that elections are, it's an electioneering year, it sounds right when you say minimum wage increase? Let's start with you, Bwana Joshua.
Now, you can't say whether it was the right thing or not, because being the Labor Day, it is always the time which the government announces such policies. So as to the timing, that was expected, being the Labor Day. However, as per the general expectation, I think the timing, of course, was suspect, which in this case, the electioneering being here. I should point to the fact that the last 2 years, the president never gave any increment.
He never even attended. He was not even attending.
In fact, he never attended. This should be his third. So the electioneering always has something to do with the politician. So it is understandable, it is expected, but as to the timing, Labor Day is when such increments are always discussed, because it is always expected that the Labor Day is the day in which the Kenyan worker is celebrated.
Yes.
But bottom line, the 18% has political undertones, because for the first time, I don't know if you noted that for the first time you had the president and the deputy president, and quite a significant number of the cabinet secretaries were there. And even from the trade union section, I could see that for once you had almost all unions represented. You had the Kenya National Union Teachers speaking the same voice with Atuoli Court, which is a rare thing. Remember that previously they have tussled as to whether KNUT is part of KOTU. So you would understand the significance of this year is that elections are 3 months away. Unlike before, when elections are in December, these elections are in August, and that would explain the impetus.
Yes, and but when Maurice Odwor, given our economic status currently as a country, was the 18% increase, was this the right time to actually announce a minimum wage increase?
Thank you, Fred. If you look at the timing, it was expected because, again, it was 1st of May with the Labor Day, where Kenyan workers celebrated. And again, if you look at it, we are just 3 months away from elections. And if you look at just the operating environment, Kenyans are going through a lot of hardships. Look at the prices for basic commodity goods. Look at the price for milk has gone all the way to 80 shillings a packet. Look at the price for unga has gone all the way to about 51.50 shillings. Look at the price for sugar is also this has also increased significantly. So if we're putting all these things in totality, it was expected, mainly coming from these three perspectives. It was a Labor Day, yes, 3 months to election, and also the cost of living has significantly increased in the country.
Okay, but the economy just, experts are saying the economy is shrinking, nothing is happening really, and that's where my question is coming from. But yes, it's a campaign period, yes, it was Labor Day. After all, last year the president didn't even attend that celebration. But being a campaign period, do you think that is the main reason why there was this increase, given that in economic times such as ours, probably that would not be the way to go?
I think if you look at the Kenyan economic environment where we are now, already inflation is above 11.5%, 4% above the government target, upper target of 7.5. If you look at the cost of living in terms of the basic commodity goods has become very expensive. People are struggling even to survive on just the basic, the basic requirements. If you put all these things, as much as the economy is growing, but it's not filtering down to the citizens. So that's why the president had no option. They had to respond by giving these people at least something, so that they can even say that as much as the cost of living have increased, at least you were given 18%. But you look at 18% with whatever we've seen in terms of cost of living is still not
Yes.
yet what Kenyans expect.
Because the question now that arises, Bwana Joshua, is a minimum wage increase sufficient, or is it even the right way to tackle the kind of issues that the common Mwananchi is facing? The price of unga is already too high. Even this 18% does not change much.
Now, when you talk about the minimum wage, one, I also need to correct a misconception. When it comes to the minimum wage, the 18% was only to cover for those that are considered to earn the least.
Yes.
So we are going for the lowest bracket. I think yesterday quite a number of workers thought that 18% applied across the different working groups. That is not the case. So minimum wage is basically to cushion the lowest of all. Secondly, there was a follow-up policy I think the president announced, but I'm always skeptical of such a policy, because when it comes to taxation, I would rather listen when I see what KRA would charge and what the finance would come in. Because on top of the minimum wage, I think the president came up with the idea that they wish to expand the tax ban, which in this case they want to raise the amount or the taxable salary. So that would make a bit of sense if it is implemented together with the minimum wage, but that is part of a jigsaw. When it comes to cost of living, I'm not an economist, but I think basic understanding, as my colleague has talked about, when you talk about the rising cost of living or the current inflation rate being at 11.5%, and you have an 18% increment to the lowest cadre earner, so that basically gives you a difference of around 5%, and that would be something like 500 to 1,000 shillings. Because remember, if this worker earns 13,000 in Nairobi and you give 18%, that's like 2,000-3,000 on top. So with the high cost of living that is wiped out, that's why the reaction yesterday was, thank you so much, Mr. President, for giving us this 18%, but that one doesn't solve our situation. So it is part of a problem. In fact, it is part of a solution. The main thing that happens when it comes to policies, a policy is not done in isolation.
Yes.
A policy is one among others. So I think this one was a populist kind of a policy, and we have agreed that it is mostly has the election undertone coming in. But importantly, that one doesn't offer solution. Any economist will tell you the best solution the government can offer the workers is having an economic growth, having an economy that works for the majority. I've been a keen follower on economic discussions, and one thing that came out clearly is that the Jubilee government has neglected the production areas of the economy. They have gone big on infrastructure, but it has a drawback in the sense that when you neglect the production as areas of the economy, the net effect is that the trickle-down effect doesn't get to the local man. When you put in, for example, 350 billion on one project like the Standard Gauge Railway, and the whole project is mostly implemented by the financial, in this case the Exim Bank, and the workers being expatriates, the same won't be felt. You can't compare with the same money being put in the production sector. So in order to have a genuine impact, in order to have what we say is productive for the poor man, on top of the minimum wage is the issue of the economy. You deal with the economy, you have an economy that is spread out, that is trickled down. I think that would make a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, the small worker says, you've added 2,000, 3,000 more, yet when I go to the supermarket, I cannot afford that. So that becomes a drawback. And that's why as a lawyer it will be difficult to explain as a policy and tell people that this is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it cannot be treated in isolation. It is one apart among others. It's part of a jigsaw. That's what
it's definitely a good thing, and you used probably the right word. It could be populist, because it applies to the segment of society under formal employment, I suppose. Quite a number of Kenyans are in formal employment. They run their own businesses. Does this benefit them in any way? To be specific, I think the statistics were out yesterday that we have, I think, 2.2 million Kenyans employed formally, 700,000 by the public sector, which is government, both national and county, and around 1.4 by the private sector. Now, 2.2 million out of the 45 or so million Kenyans. So that tells you the majority are in the informal sector. So that would mean around 30, 40, 50% of the population is not captured by the same. In fact, those are, there is a written article from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers arguing that
the wage bill only seeks to affect the formal employers beyond the informal employers, and in fact the net effect will be to a smaller group.
Yes.
Because for the last 2-3 years we've seen companies closing, and importantly even the multinationals relocating. So that means the formal employment is shrinking and not expanding.
Yes.
So even with the increase in the minimum wage, in fact the target group that you are looking at is smaller. In fact, to be specific, when you even talk about the 2.2 million that are in formal employment, how many of those are covered by the minimum wage? In today's dailies, you will see the amounts we are talking about. People earning 5,000 to 14,000.
Yes.
So how many? What is the number of the 2.2 million? Possibly only 500,000. So the group is smaller. And the nature of our economy, the way it is structured, more informal than formal, so the same policy may not be. But it can only generate positive news. Yes. And for a government of the day, they really need positive news going into the election. So you would understand the reason why they would come in. Yes. Right now.
Maurice, you're an economic analyst, but I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to look at it from with a political lens as well, slightly. Because yes, when Joshua Kipto says it is a populist move, might not really affect many people. Would it have been easier, or do you think the president just opted for the easier option of raising the minimum wage as opposed to trying and reduce the cost of living in terms of common basic foods? The price of maize flour, for example, is 120 above the price of sugar. Some things. Do you think the president opted? Probably population 18% sounds something huge.
Economy, and given the 18% was a short-term solution. If you look at what we need to do in the long run, we need to have on our cost of production structure. So that now, because even in Kenya, you know, if you go to walk to a supermarket, you get a sugar produced in Southern Sudan. It's in Kenya, and it's cheaper than sugar that is produced in Mumias. So you wonder what happened for this sugar to move from Southern Sudan to Kenya, and for the Mumias one to move from Mumias to Nairobi. We need to work on our cost of production structure. We need to make cost of ease of doing business of operating environment to be more conducive for business to thrive in, to create jobs. As we are speaking here now, even if the 18%, most companies are downsizing. Look at banks, they are retrenching. Look at even multinationals, they are relocating, which means again, we are looking at a small segment of the society, and the majority are still suffering. When we give additional increment of 18%, the bigger question should be who is addressing the people that are the jobless category, which again are the majority of the Kenyans. What we need to look at now for us to tackle this cost of living issue long term, we need to look at our cost of production structure. We need to work at we need to come up with a mechanism of making ease of doing business and also business operating environment to be conducive for both local and multinational companies to come and create jobs. And also we need to look at which sector of the economy is mainly our key focus. My colleagues have talked about the key sectors of economy have been selected, and we are seeing a number of more so focus being more driven towards infrastructural projects, which are mainly funded by borrowing, and again borrowing complicates economic outlook. We are looking at again most of the infrastructure projects, they are what I usually call they are jobless projects, because if you look at in totality, very few Kenyans are employed. So we need to refocus back and again look at now what are the long-term solutions that we can put in place to address the issue of cost of living.
Okay. Now, of course, the Federation of Kenyan Employers has already opposed this. Court was already demanding for 22%. They didn't get that. The Federation of Kenyan Employers had indicated that any increase in the minimum wage could actually force some companies out of operation in Kenya. Do you think that will happen, Joshua?
Not at all, but you understand where they're coming from. At the moment, the employers feel that they are up against the wall at the moment because the economic outlook doesn't favor them. So you would understand their point of view. And we also seek to understand whatever the policy implication when it comes to the respective bodies. When you have the Federation of Kenya Employers versus the trade unions job, even by law, their role is always to fight and clamor for better terms for their employees. And trade unions' weapon is only to have better salary increment, better working terms for the employee. And the only easy way they can get that done at the moment, you know, their workers, their members are insisting that we are feeling the pinch. Please get us better. That's why court would come up at 22%. The only opposite of that would be that FKE has a point. If the economy was doing well, then who are they to refuse? But you know, they have a valid point. They come back to you on the table and said, we have no problem giving you the amount. No, in fact, we have no problem to increase, because the more the money to employees, possibly it may increase productivity. But when we ourselves are up against the wall, because at the moment the economic outlook doesn't favor employers, it is not magic for you to see multinational downsizing to the extent that Kenya is remaining more or less like a warehouse economy. When you have multinational not manufacturing, not producing here, that's a dangerous telltale sign. To be specific, Maurice, being an investor or coming from the investment community, understands well when he talks about the production, whatever the production areas of the economy, if that place could be considered. To be specific, have we ever done or have we factored in the cost of doing business in Kenya? I think one of the strong campaign agendas for Jubilee in 2013 was to ensure ease of doing business. Fine, they may try here, there, but can we say 4 years down the line we've had a case where the cost of doing business has been less? There is more power, but there was a report again last year, towards the end of last year, by World Bank that we are producing excess power. And the Kenya Association of Manufacturers was saying we are not feeling the change in power tariffs, that what we were producing with at 2013 and now, in fact, 2013 September was cheapest for the last 5 years. So that tells you if the government will have a totality of policy shift in terms of, in fact, why don't you work hard as a government to ensure that the business community are having it easy? In what way? For the business, in fact, the incentive is simple. Just have sound policies. I feel as a country, whatever the key components of our like need to be, like the sector players, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, we have the Federation of Kenya Employers. Where are they when it comes to these policies? Do they come in and really show the government that if you do 1, 2, 3 for us, starting from taxation, going all the way to the cost of doing business, if it becomes cheaper, then it will be even cheaper to do business, and they can even employ more. The only reason they downsize, they are doing badly. If you're having cheaper sugar in Sudan, the same sugar produced in Kenya compared to here, that tells you the difference is not that the retailers or the wholesalers are choosing to sell expensive here. It's simply because the cost of doing business, the amount they put in rent, electricity and everything makes it difficult and untenable. And it is a lose-lose situation if you have an increment in the minimum wage, but at the same time leading to job loss. You see, now at the end of the day, if you are pushing more people out of the formal employment, it has its own drawbacks. More unemployment, less taxation. So what happens?
Let's get Bwana Maurice Odwor's thoughts on that, and as far as the FKE sentiments are concerned.
If you look at employers, right now, when you look at most employers, what they are going through is totally experiencing at what we call difficult operating environment in the country. Look at banks as a result of interest rate cap, banks are retrenching. In fact, banks are retrenching almost over 2,000 employees, and there are still a number of employees coming. Look at manufacturing, they are also struggling. Look at most of them reporting losses. If you look at even in other agricultural slowdown, and look at that contributes almost to a quarter of the Kenyan economy. Look at sectors like electricity. According to World Bank, we are overproducing, yet internally the cost of electricity is increasing, which again complicates the cost of production. Look at even taxation structure, again not conducive to a number of businesses. And the thing that complicates everything totally, in the run-up to election, we are seeing now most of multinational companies now shying away from Kenya, waiting to see what will happen, so that now they can even start look at operating in Kenya.
Do you think this particular directive will actually could make some multinationals actually downsize and maybe eventually just ship out?
If you look at 18%, it may necessarily lead to most multinationals leaving the country. But if you look at it in totality, what this company are looking at is just the total operating environment for businesses, where the environment is conducive. This is just one of them, and even with about most of their staff not even fall into that category that qualifies for the 18%. So 18% may not have an effect in terms of the decision making multinational company leaving the country, but just the overall business.
But I'm thinking most of the industries, if you go to industrial area, they employ many of these casual laborers. Probably that is where most of these people tend to fall, who qualify under minimum wage.
Yes, if you go to the number of people qualify to qualify for the 18%, but look at now the impact of this 18% in terms of decision, whether to continue operating in Kenya or not, it may not have a significant effect. What we need to do is to come up with a long-term mechanism of making business operating environment more conducive and more favorable for operating in the country, to continue creating jobs, which will again in turn enable people to pay taxes and fund the government to continue funding other development activities.
Yes. Now, in terms of compliance, We know, yes, the president may give a directive, may make a directive during Labor Day. In 2013, like a month or two after he became president, of course, he awarded Kenyan workers a 15% rise in minimum wage. Do companies really comply? Do all employers comply with this thing? Or is it just some announcement, Kenyans are happy, we all applaud the president, then it goes nowhere? Sure.
When it comes to compliance, remember that we have the Labor Ministry. We also have the trade unions. The main check to ensure compliance is always the trade union. And for the lower cadre employees, most of them are represented with these trade unions, COTU and the rest. So it becomes a little bit easy now that the trade unions were, in fact, if you look at the Labor Day celebration, since it's the trade unions who are always the host, so you would expect the trade unions to follow through. And then when it comes again to the companies, it is they are subject to the employment rules. They are subject to the employment policies. When the president gives such a directive and the Labor Ministry picks up the same employers, now that they are part of the Federation of Kenya Employers, they always follow through and have them implemented. In fact, one thing that I would wish to point out, when FKA comes out strongly against such a minimum wage bill, in my opinion, I would think it is more or less like a counter argument. It is their strategy to clamor for better policies beyond this minimum wage bill, in the sense that they would be arguing to the government, in as much as we would want us to implement and to execute the 18%, but remember also, you also need to help us when it comes to such things as the cost of doing business. It should be better for us, then it will be better for us. So implementation, there is a guarantee, because such policies are followed through by the trade unions, that those are the main players who ensure compliance. And then you also have the Labor Ministry. Now that, you know, the beauty for the labor sector, you have players being part and parcel of both. Employers are grouped under Kenya Association of Manufacturers as well as the Federation of Kenya Employers. Now that they always have the tripartite meetings and talks and negotiations, the CBA is always the order of the day when it comes to such organizations, so it becomes a little bit easy. It would be difficult if some of those lower cadre employees are not unionizable, if they are not part of a union. That is where
the union has a lot to play in.
The union has a lot, and COTUs to be specific, because those minimum wage, the minimum wage earners are mostly those working in tea estates and such.
Now, gentlemen, before I let you go, one final question. Apart from the 18% minimum wage increase directed by the president yesterday, of course, he said something about bonuses and benefits, other benefits that are now exempt from tax. Not exempt, I think they give a bracket. How much does that affect employers, really? Does it affect employers, or it's a benefit to employees? Bonamoris.
I think if you look at it, employee will stand to benefit more in terms of their and the amount that is exempted from payment of the tax. But if you look at it, this thing still at the end of the day, it goes back to the cost of production, the cost of living in the country. Does the benefit from the taxation warrant or compensate the citizens as a result of the rising cost of living, which I think is no. Because if you look at where we were at a time like this last year, if you look at the price for the basic commodities, look at like milk, look at items like unga, items like rice, the price has significantly increased, that even overshadows the increment that they were given. In terms of all these incentives, yes, they are there, but will not compensate the citizen in terms of the rising cost of living.
Finally, your thoughts on that?
Thoughts on that are simple. That for me would be a top-up policy on top of the minimum wage bill. I talked about it not being a policy in isolation. So coming up with the exemptions is basically to also capture the group that are not served by the minimum wage bill, because the minimum wage bill is basically for the least paid. Above the least paid, if you talk about 13,000, someone in Nairobi being paid 13,000, there's someone being paid 20,000. Now that is the group the president was going for, because there's a significant, in fact, up to 3/4 of the 700,000 in public and the 1.4 in the private sector are above the minimum wage. So for them, the minimum wage was not for them. So that policy was to, in fact, it was tailor-made for people earning between let's say 20 to 40,000. So the bonuses, it was just meant to cushion that group. Importantly also, it was maybe as a way to try to show the Federation of Kenya Employers that we are not just going for the minimum wage, but we're also considering other aspects that can also cushion the employee. So that was my case. But bottom line, those are among the few, I call them token policies, because in totality, if they solve the issue of the economy at large, then for us that would work. And that should be a long-term thing. Put investment where majority of the population can benefit. If you get that done, in fact, labor matters becomes easy. I would have my parting shot by comparing with Singapore. Are you aware that in Singapore, for example, they have a system that works to the extent that trade unions are almost non-existent? In fact, for them, it's a national crisis when you hear a smaller entity or a strike anywhere. Simply because once the economy works and they have a spread out economy across the different groups, then you wouldn't have any issue of labor unrest and such. So if we can fix the economy, then when it comes to the labor-related matters, it will be lesser. But the more difficult the economic situation, even if right now we go to the Employment and Labor Relations Court, so many matters coming up simply because of the nature of our economic situation. People are being laid off, and most of them, in fact,
Probably
they still come back to court.
Should just focus more on improving the economy. Well, thank you so much, Bwana Joshua Kipto, an advocate and an employment and labor relations expert. Also, Maurice Odwor, economic analyst and investment manager at Cyton, helping us understand exactly what it means following President Uhuru Kenyatta's Labor Day directive of an 18% minimum wage increase. We now want to take another short break. When we return, we'll be talking about Wiper Party. Now the party is facing a troubling wave of widespread disquiet stemming from the party's nominations. Will Kalonzo Musyoka's party survive the storm? That's the question. That